Hello and welcome to the ePrime Intermediate webinar. My name is Devin Struthers and I will be your presenter for today. In this webinar, we will discuss how to convert an experiment from standard to professional. We will discuss how to upgrade an experiment from one task to another task. We will also discuss how to create a series of practice trials. We will do a little bit of basic scripting using a summation object. We will also demonstrate how to do some advanced merging techniques and some analysis techniques. Please remember that the webinar materials for this particular webinar are very important. This is what we like to call a follow-along webinar. So we will give you an ES2 file to start from. Then you can take that ES2 file that you start from and follow along with me. At certain points in the webinar, I will bring up a screen that goes over what we just did. If you would like to, please pause the recording at this point and catch up. As always, stay connected to PST. We have a Facebook page, we have a LinkedIn account, we tweet, and we have a YouTube channel. The one that I like to bring up in particular is the YouTube channel. I bring this up because we have a lot of wonderful how-to videos on the YouTube channel. If you see this webinar and find that you still have questions about how to do things in ePrime, I definitely recommend checking out that YouTube video. It's a very helpful resource. Now the first thing we're going to do today is we're going to start with those materials that you were sent. Right now I have this basic lexical decision task. This is where we're going to start. So go ahead and double click on it to open it in eStudio. As you can see, I'm using ePrime 2.0 SP1 or Service Pack 1. This is build 2.0.10.353. And what we have here is a basic lexical decision task. If you've taken our ePrime basic webinar, this is the task that we have at the very end of the webinar. Now if you take a look at this, there are two places where you can tell ePrime Edition. The first place is on the very top of the window here. It says ePrime Professional. This means that I'm using a professional edition of the software. However, if you look at the experiment object here, it says Standard. This means I'm using a standard edition of this experiment. So, while I have Professional eStudio, I'm still using ePrime Standard to create this file. Now if you notice that I have ePrime Standard, you notice that there are a few things that aren't the same about ePrime Standard. So for example, this eRun test feature is not available. We also have other things that are not available in Standard, like script sense and Toolbox Defaults. So to convert this from Standard to Professional, you'll want to go ahead and save this as a professional experiment. Now keep in mind that once you save a standard experiment as professional, you can't save it back to Standard. This is one of the caveats of ePrime Professional. So I recommend using Standard if you are collaborating with other labs that may be using ePrime Standard as well. And this is something that I would ask the other labs. Now if I would like to save this as a professional experiment, let's go ahead and click on File and click Save As. Now here you have Basic Lexical Decision. What we're going to do is we're going to take Basic Lexical Decision and we're going to save it to match the name of the experiment that we're going to create. So this is going to be Intermediate Priming Task. Now, most important part is this Save As Type property here. If you look at the Save As Type, it says ePrime 2.0 Standard Files. This means that this file is saved as a standard file. If I would like to change this, simply click the drop down and select Professional. And if I click Save, I'm going to get this prompt. This prompt lets me know that I'm converting from Standard to Professional. If I convert to Professional, I will have all of the features that Professional affords this. However, I will not be able to open this in ePrime Standard. So I'm going to go ahead and click Yes to convert this file. So now if you see at the top of my structure window, it says Professional. And if you take a look up here at eRun Test, you can see that this feature is now available. So now we're going to go ahead and actually edit this experiment. So what we're going to do is we're going to turn this from a lexical decision task to a priming task. And I would like to go over my hypothesis first. As I mentioned in the ePrime Basic webinar, I don't actually like editing my experiments until I know exactly how I'm going to edit them and exactly what is going to change. So first, in my priming task, I would like participants to be primed with either a red image or a green image. These images are going to act as our primes, and I'm going to tell participants that a red image is more likely to be paired, if we look at our try list here, with a non-word and a green prime is more likely to be paired with a word. That's how we're going to do our priming. My hypothesis is that when primed with a red image, participants will be more likely to anticipate a non-word. So this means that the reaction time values that I get at the end of the experiment are going to be much smaller when the prime is congruent with the stimulus type. If a green image is paired with a word, and if a red image is paired with a non-word, my RTs should be much lower than if a green image was paired with a non-word and a red image was paired with a word. So let's familiarize ourselves with the structure of this current experiment for a little bit. The first thing we have is our instruction screen. Welcome to the experiment. You will be shown a fixation followed by a stimulus. If the stimulus is a word, press 1. If the stimulus is a non-word, press 2. Press spacebar to begin. These are okay for now. I'm going to have to edit these eventually. Next I have my fixation. This will have to be changed to add a prime, and we're going to do this by loading an image into E prime, and I'm going to demonstrate how to do that. Next I have my stimulus. It's just a simple slide text sub-object in the middle of a slide object. And finally is the feedback display object. This doesn't have to change at all. Okay, so as I mentioned, we're going to go ahead and edit the instructions. So double-click on the instructions text display object to open it in eStudio's workspace. Right now it says, welcome to your experiment. You'll be shown a fixation followed by a stimulus. If the stimulus is a word, press 1. If the stimulus is a non-word, press 2. We want to change this to actually add our prime. Add a row of text just beneath this line to include my prime. So, if you see a green image, the stimulus will likely be a word. If you see a red image, the stimulus, let me try this again, I'm just not going to. If you see a red image, the stimulus will likely be a non-word. Press spacebar to begin. Now that sets up the pattern of responses that I expect from participants, and it sets up the prime. So let's go ahead and click on Properties Pages, and click on Duration Input. I'm doing this just to verify that the timing is exactly what I want. So the duration is set to infinite, and the keyboard allowable is set to space. This means that this instruction screen is going to stay on the screen as long as participants need it to. So if at this point if you would like to catch up, please feel free to pause this recording now and do exactly what I had done. This demonstrates how to edit a text display object and verify properties on a Duration Input tab. Now that we've changed the instruction screen, let's go ahead and exit out of that. And let's take a look at the next thing that we have to change. The next thing that we're going to change is we're actually going to change this trial list object. Right now it has dog and cat and these two non-words as our possible stimuli. However, that's not enough. That's only 4 samples. I would actually like this to incorporate many more words. I would like this to have a pool of 6 words and 6 non-words, of which the experiment only chooses 2 at random per participant. What I could do is I could make a huge list, and I could have 12 different entries, and those 12 different entries would have to be paired with my green stimulus and my red stimulus, and this would actually make this trial list look quite large. However, if we would like to reduce the size of this trial list but still get that nice cross-section, all we need is a nested list. Now a nested list allows you to create a cross-section of variables without having to write out a very large list object. They're created under this nested column. Our nested lists, in this case, are going to hold all of our 6 possible stimuli for words and all of our 6 possible stimuli for non-words. So to create a nested list, we're going to go ahead and I'm going to demonstrate 2 methods for creating a nested list. The first method is to take a list object from the toolbox, drag it into the workspace, and release. As you can see, the list object is created, and it's created in the unreferenced eObjects section. To edit this, all we need to do is just simply begin editing the list. So we'll go ahead and click Add Attribute, and this attribute is going to be called StimText. Now it's important that this attribute lines up with the name of this attribute in the trial list object. And I'm going to show you why very soon. Now what this is going to do is this is going to hold all of our words. So let's go ahead and add multiple levels by clicking this Add Multiple Levels button at the top of the list object. And the number of levels that I would like to add is 5. That way I have 6 possible selections. And I will go ahead and type in 5 words. So I'll do dog, cat, hat, dad, bat, and car. These are my 6 possible words that E' can choose from during my task. Now the next thing I want to do is I would like to change 2 properties about this. First of all, and this is something that I like to mention in all of my webinars, I believe that its name should reflect its function. Right now it says list 1. This tells us what it is, but it does not tell us what it does. So let's click on list 1, right click, and click rename. You can also click F2 if you would like. Instead of list 1, let's type word list and hit enter. This changes the name to word list. The next thing I want to do is I want to change it from sequential selection to random selection. As you can see here, my stem text contains dog, cat, hat, dad, bat, and car. If E' is only choosing 2 of these, then E' is only ever going to show dog and cat, and it will never get to the remaining 4. I would like each participant to randomly receive 2 of these 4 stimuli. To change that, click on the Properties page icon at the top of the word list, click on the Selection method, and instead of sequential, we will select random. Now, before I move on, this order property is something we have a lot of users asking about. And as you can see, we have a couple of these that sound almost identical. So I'm going to go ahead and go through each one of these possibilities. So the first one we have is sequential. Sequential will display stimuli in the order presented on the list object. Next, we have random. Random will randomize each list object, crossing that particular selection off whenever it is used so it is not used again. Random with replacement does not cross a value off when it is selected, so the possibility of repeating that stimuli again is very real. Counterbalance allows you to randomly select only one level from your list object and display that to participants. You can counterbalance by subject or by session number. Offset works much the same way as sequential does. However, this will randomly pick a number to offset by. So, for example, if the offset number is 2, E' will run through the list in sequential selection starting with 2, and will go 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, instead of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Permutation works a lot like randomization. It picks a random number and then presents the stimuli at random based on that number. For now, we will just select random. The next thing we want to do is move to our Reset Exit tab. Since we're only going to show 2 samples, let's change this exit list to after 2 samples. You have the possibility of going through cycles. So a cycle is one run of the entire list, or however much you define a cycle using this reset sampling or define cycle category, or you can have this list terminate after a certain amount of numbered seconds. So if I would like participants to see as many of these as possible in 10 seconds, I can simply change this to after 10 seconds. However, that's not what we want for this paradigm. So we will have this exit the list after 2 samples. So once we've done that, let's go ahead and actually nest this list. So we have this word list here that's currently in our unreferenced object section. It is not nested in the trial list. However, if we would like to nest it, all we need to do is under our nested column, type the word list and hit enter. If I hit enter, over here in the structure window, you can see that my word list jumped from the unreferenced object section to just under the trial list. All I need to do is type word list into the first 2 rows of this list object. That way E' knows that in these first 2 trials we are only referencing the word list. The only possible way that we could get a non-word is if I were to also nest a non-word list in there. So I'm going to demonstrate how to create a non-word list now. Now the first method that we used to create a list was to drag a list object from the toolbox and open it in the workspace here. Another method to create a nested list is just begin to type the name of a nested list into the nested column. So I'm going to type non-word list and hit enter. E prime will say that non-word list does not exist. Would you like to create it? I click yes. And when I click yes, pay attention to the structure window. As you can see, it changed from a question mark to a list object. This means that it created a nested list for us. So under this next row, I will type non-word list. And then let's go ahead in the non-word list and let's make roughly the same changes. So let's go ahead and click add attribute, and the attribute is going to be called stemText. We will add 5 levels to this, and the 5 levels that we will add will be 5 non-words. Once we've selected 6 non-words, let's change the same properties. So we'll want to go into Properties page here, click Selection method. Our order is going to be random again. And for reset exit, we're going to exit after 2 samples. Click out of this. And now we have our word list and our non-word list already set. Now the only thing we need to do now is to delete this stemText attribute. Since we have the stemText attribute referenced in these nested lists, there and there, and there, we do not need the nested list on this trial list. This is a mistake that many ePrime users often make. So let's go ahead and highlight the entire attribute by clicking on the stemText word, and then let's click Remove Attribute. It will ask if we are sure, and we will click Yes. Now keep in mind that the stimulus object is still going to be able to get the value of stemText and will still resolve properly to either a word or non-word, despite that attribute not being located here. Now I'd like to invite you to pause the recording at this point if you would like to catch up. This demonstrates how to make a nested list in 2 different ways. This demonstrates how to change the selection method of a list object, and it demonstrates how to change the number of samples that a list object will go through before it exits. While we're editing the try list, the next thing I want to do is I would like to add our prime. We do not have a prime in here. So we're going to go ahead and click Add Attribute, and this is going to be called Prime Color. Now, if you notice, we have 2 prime colors. We have green and red. So I'm going to type each one of them in the prime color. So we have green and red, and then I'm going to highlight both of these, take this fill handle here, and fill in the remaining 2. And as you can see, it copies those 2 and fills them in below. So I have green and red as my prime color. Now I would like to make one more attribute. This attribute is going to be used for data analysis purposes. So go ahead and click Add Attribute, and my attribute will be called Congruency. And I will hit Enter to add it. This Congruency attribute is going to let me know if the prime color matches a word or a non-word, just like in our instructions. So it says if you see a green image, a stimulus will more likely be a word. So I will call that a congruent condition. And if the participants see a red image, they're more likely to see a non-word. So I'm going to call this a congruent condition. This means that my remaining 2 conditions, so when word is paired with a red color and when non-word is paired with a green color, this means that this is going to be an incongruent condition. Now, there's only one more thing we need to change about this try list. If we read our instructions again, it says, if you see a red image, the stimulus will likely be a word. If you see a red image, the stimulus will likely be a non-word. If we take a look at our list, ePrime actually has a very equal opportunity to present a green prime with a word and a red prime with a word. So those instructions aren't quite correct right now. However, we can alter this list object very quickly and very easily to accommodate that. To do that, let's change this weight property. We will change the weight property for only the congruent conditions, so there is a higher probability of these 2 being paired together. So let's go ahead and change the weight from 1 to 3 and hit enter. As you can see, the number of samples actually jumped. So if I keep this at 1, it says the number of samples is 4. However, if I change this to 3, I've added 2 more samples, so now the number of samples is 6. Since E' is going to run for exactly 1 cycle, this means that the number of trials that will be presented will also increment. So I'm going to do the same for my congruent list. I'm going to do the same for my non-congruent condition. I'm going to do the same for my red prime condition and change that to 3. So now my congruent and incongruent conditions have different probabilities of being presented. Now, if you'd like to pause the recording at this point and you would like to catch up, what this has demonstrated is how to add an attribute that is used only for data logging purposes, i.e. the congruency attribute. It also demonstrates how to create an attribute of prime color and how to change the weight of a trial so it is presented more than one time. Now that we've finished our trial list, let's go ahead and X out of this. Now all we need to do is add a prime. So to add a prime, let's go ahead and take a slide object and we will put it just after fixation in the trial procedure. Now in this instance, we're actually going to delete the fixation. We're going to delete the fixation because instead of a fixation, we'll have a prime object. So go ahead and click on fixation and it'll jump down to unreferenced D objects. If you click delete one more time on unreferenced D objects, you'll get this error message that says this action will remove all unreferenced objects and will be destroyed forever. Would you like to proceed? Aside from being a little over the top, this is actually a very true error message. So go ahead and click yes, and it'll go away from our unreferenced D objects. So for our slide 1 object, let's go ahead and rename this from slide 1 to prime, just so the name follows the function. Let's go ahead and double click on it to open. Now that we've opened it in the workstation, we would like to add an image to this object. Just like how we added a slide text sub-object to this stimulus in the basic webinar, let's go ahead and add a slide image sub-object to the prime object. Doing this is extremely similar. All you do is click slide image once, move your cursor anywhere on the screen, and click. And now I've created an area in which an image can be displayed. Now, if we click on the sub-object properties page, we can actually start to edit these. The first thing I want to do is I would like to associate a file name with this. Now what I can do is I can load an image directly. So I can click this open folder here and I can click on green, and look, if I click apply, you can see that it shows up there. And if I go ahead and click on red and click apply, you can see that it shows up in there as well. Now, if you notice there's something a little odd about these primes, not the entire image is being shown. We can actually fix this by changing the stretch property. If we set the stretch property to yes and click apply, watch what happens. The image is actually stretched to fit the area that I define. So this is a way to get the images to fit in a very specific area despite their size outside of E'. Now if you take a look at this, you notice that it's looking a little out of proportion. He's looking a little more squat than usual. To fix this, what we'll do is we'll change this stretch mode property. Right now, it is set to both. However, if I set it to only left and right, you can see that the top of his head and the bottom of his feet get cut off, but if I change it to up-down, you'll see that he's now directly proportional. Whether you use stretch mode both up, down, or left and right is completely dependent on the images that you're using. There's no one right or wrong choice for this. It is entirely dependent on the images that you're using and the paradigm that you're using to present them. So, loading the images in this way does a very good job of loading one image at a time. However, I'm going to need to switch between red or green depending on the trial. So to do this, I'm actually going to delete the name red here, and instead of the name red, I'm going to make an attribute reference for my prime color attribute that I made on my trial list object. So I'll do a square bracket, I will type prime color, I will end my square bracket. As you can see, it turned blue because it is an attribute reference in E', and if you take a look here, what I have is .bmp at the very end. This means that E' is going to concatenate .bmp onto either red or green, which would appear after this prime color attribute resolves itself. You notice that all I put in my try list was red or green. This is so I can now tack this .bmp at the end, and it actually creates an entire image. So if I click apply, watch what happens to that little image now. It changes to our little slide image sub-object icon. However, it is not only in grayscale. Since it's not in grayscale, this means that there is an image associated with this particular slide image sub-object. Now, the last thing we want to do is change the position here to center on both the X and the Y properties. Go ahead and click apply. And I would like to change the size to 50%. And click apply. Go ahead and click OK to save these changes. And the last thing I would like to do is just edit the very simple properties of this object. So let's go ahead and click on the properties page icon, click on the duration input, and let's change the duration to 500 instead of 1000 to match that fixation object that we deleted. So let's go ahead and click OK. Now please feel free to pause the recording at this point if you would like to catch up. What this demonstrates is two different methods for loading an image object into E'. It demonstrates how to resize an image object, how to change its aspect ratio, and how to get it to stretch to fit an area that you've defined. So before we move on from our prime object, I would like to demonstrate one very cool feature of E' 2.0 Professional, and that is something called Toolbox Defaults. You can get to Toolbox Defaults by right-clicking in the toolbox and clicking Toolbox Defaults. What this Toolbox Defaults property allows you to do is it allows you to preset the default value of every object in eStudio. So for example, let's say that when I'm editing my task, I find that I'm always changing the text of a text display object from a font of Courier New to a font of, let's say, Arial Unicode. If I make this change every time, then that starts to get very old and it starts to be very monotonous, tedious, and time-consuming. However, if you change it using Toolbox Defaults, every time you create a new object in E' of that type, so every time I create a text display object in this instance, it's going to actually present a default font of Arial Unicode. Now keep in mind that this Toolbox Defaults does not actually travel between experiments. So if I'm making an experiment here, my lab mate who's making another experiment who uses an entirely different set of defaults is not affected by mine. However, if you find that you do have default values that you really like, what you can do is you can import from another .es2 file all of the defaults that you like. So let's say I'm making multiple experiments at a time and I always like my font to be Arial. I don't have to go ahead and change all of these. I don't have to make all of these changes every time I'm trying to make an experiment. All I have to do is simply click Import, find an ES2 file that contains all of my favorite defaults, and import that one. There's also the option to reset defaults if you would like. Now one thing I do want to mention is not only does this contain all of our E-objects, if you scroll to the bottom, this also contains all of our slide sub-objects as well. I can change the font of a slide text sub-object as well as change the font of a text display object. So this is just a nifty feature in E', just in case you were ever wondering. So now that I have my prime set up, this is actually all I need to do a simple priming task in E'. However, I would like to change this a little more. So right now we have our feedback display object here. This is our pre-formatted feedback object in E', and it's very serviceable. However, I want to change this to create a customized feedback. I would like this feedback to be whatever I want it to be. So this also demonstrates how to do contingent paradigms in E' as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete this feedback object just like I did my fixation. So click on it once and click delete, and then click on unreferenced objects and click delete as well, and destroy it forever. Now I'm going to want to add a slide object to the very bottom of my trial procedure. Let's rename this object from slide 1 to feedback and hit enter. Now let's double click on it to open it. Now this object here is pretty blank. It's not exactly the kind of feedback that we want, so let's edit this to actually be something that we want. Now, if you remember the feedback display object, it cycled through different slide states to display the type of feedback that it wanted. We're actually going to do this in the exact same way. So right now we have one slide state called default, and we don't have any more. Let's go ahead and add another slide state. This is also blank, but we have one called default and one called slide 1. When thinking about slide states, I always like to think about it like pages in a book. All of the slides are kind of like books, and each of them have a different page. The slide state is just whichever page you would like to show participants at this time. So, since we're sticking with the convention that the name always follows the function, let's rename our slide states so they actually reflect the function. So instead of default, let's go ahead and click on this slide subobject properties page at the top here, and let's name default to correct. That way, this is the slide state that actually displays when participants respond correctly. Then let's move over to state 1 and click on the subobject properties page icon, and let's change the name from state 1 to incorrect and hit OK. So this is going to be the slide state that appears when participants answer incorrectly. Now at this point, these slide states can be edited to show whatever you would like. They could have, let's say, a buzzer play during the incorrect. They could have the sound of applause play during the correct. Anything that you'd like. Just for the sake of this webinar, we're going to put very simple text in here. But please know that these can be easily edited to do whatever you want. So let's click on slide text, and we will add a slide text. And this one's just going to say something very simple like congratulations. Now when I type a long word like this into a very small slide text subobject like this, you can see that it kind of truncates my word. It's only showing me the middle part of congratulations. Now one thing I can do is I can resize it using these little pull handles here. I can also resize it by clicking on this slide subobject properties page icon. Click on frame and resize the frame using these height and width properties. So let's go ahead and change the width to 50, and we'll change the height to, let's say, 25, because it doesn't need to be very tall. Now if I click apply, it resizes. And I want to change the position, of course, to the center. Now if you would like, also feel free to change the font from something like Courier New to something more exciting. We can do Comic Sans. And we can go ahead and change bold to no. And click apply. So it looks nice and fun there. And if you want, we can also change the general tab. And if you change the forecolor of this object to blue, you will see that the text changes color. Now let's do something similar to incorrect. So for incorrect, let's add a slide text subobject. Let's click on the subobject properties page here, and let's go ahead and edit the text to say incorrect. We'll hit apply. It still truncates it a little bit, so let's jump over to our frame tab. We will change our width to 50 and our height to 25. Our X and Y positions will still be center. And we'll go to font, and we will change this to something a little more dramatic looking, maybe Forte. And then the general tab, we will change the forecolor to red. So now we have two very different incorrect and correct conditions. And let's check on the properties page here by clicking on the properties page icon at the upper left hand corner. Click on the duration tab, and 1 second should be enough. So let's click OK to dismiss this. Now if you would like to pause and catch up at this point, what the feedback object demonstrates is how to create multiple slide states. It demonstrates how to create different font for slide text subobjects, and how to change the forecolor or font color of slide text subobjects.